Hey everyone, it's Sinfonia. This video will be looking at pretty much everything Jiaoqiu related, how to play him, his relics, light cones, Eidolons, and even themes. But before we get into that, if you enjoy the content, remember to subscribe to the channel. Now I'm not going to be going over his kit in detail because I have already covered it in my previous Jiaoqiu video, so if you would like a review of his kit, you can watch it there. Instead, I will give you a quick summary of what he does. Jiaoqiu is a very comfy or convenient debuffer whose main mechanic is vulnerability instead of defense reduction. You know when they say increase the damage received? Yeah, that's vulnerability. It's usually better than defense reduction until about 70 to 90%, then defense reduction becomes better. Hence, the constant comparisons to Pela. His vulnerability, Ashen Roast, is able to be applied by literally every single ability and can stack up to 5 times for a total of 35% vulnerability. His ultimate helps him to stack much faster, and with his bonus ability, this works even for many enemies. It also gives a 15% ultimate vulnerability, so basically a damage increase for ultimate damage. He has very high attack due to his bonus ability, pretty low multipliers meaning he can't really make good use of his high attack, and he has very good AoE debuff application because his ultimate applies the debuff when enemies enter the zone, and hence is very strong in pure fiction. With that being said, I'll be focusing a lot more on builds and themes for Jiaoqiu in this video. Let's start with what stats Jiaoqiu wants. Firstly, to get the maximum 240% attack boost, you need 140% effect hit rate. You really don't want to miss out on this because it's 60% attack for every 15% effect hit rate. This already means we are building effective rate body for sure, which is 43.2% effective rate, and he also gets 28% from his traces for a total of 71.2%, meaning we still need around 69% effective rate from our light cone, our substats or relic sets, so you should be planning accordingly. For example, if you don't have enough effective rate with substats, you can try using Pan Cosmic or Eyes of the Prey instead. Next, for our boots, you guessed it, it's speed. The most important difference between Jiaoqiu and Pela is that Pela can regenerate her ultimate in 2 turns, while Jiaoqiu may need 2 to 3 turns. So the higher speed your Jiaoqiu has, the more you can close this gap because this 2 to 3 turn will always be there, but we can make the 2 to 3 turn last shorter and hence get his ultimate up faster. For his orb, it's damage percentage because he already has a ton of attack percentage. If you're not too worried about his damage and want to use him purely as a debuffer, I guess you could go for a HP percentage or defense percentage as well. But if you have E2 and above, I strongly recommend fire damage. Finally, his rope is energy regeneration rate rope. He really doesn't need extra attack percentage, and this ERR allows Jiaoqiu to get a 1 turn ultimate by using skill into out on his first action. If he doesn't have this, he can't really do a 1 turn ultimate, and that can affect your run negatively if you're trying to zero cycle and stuff like that. Even if you're not, attack percentage just isn't very valuable to him either. So because Jiaoqiu doesn't quite have a best in slot 4-piece set for him unless it's a DOT team, he can run quite a few variations or combinations, kind of like Aventurine. And hence, before we get into that mumbo jumbo, I think it's easier to explain the principles or the rules behind the relics that you choose. For planar ornaments, Glamour gives more damage than Pan Cosmic, but Pan Cosmic can give you 10% effective rate. So depending on whether you already have 140% effective rate or not, you might go for Pan Cosmic over Glamour even if it technically does less damage. Brightly Von Wack allows Jiaoqiu to get a faster 1 turn ultimate, and if your Sparkle is faster than Jiaoqiu, there may be cases where Acheron attacks before Jiaoqiu can even apply his debuff, which means you lose out on some damage. So it's more comfortable, but you only get 5% extra energy regen, and you lose out on quite a bit of damage. The 5% energy regen will rarely translate to getting his ultimate faster as well. It's like the difference between 77 energy and 80 energy. So it's only really relevant if Jiaoqiu gets hit consistently. And so now let's get into the combinations for the 4-piece relics. It's kind of the same idea as before. If you want more speed, you can run 2-piece messenger, but you obviously lose some damage, kind of like running Sprightly Von Wack. 2-piece pioneer gives you the most damage because it's plus 12% damage to debuffed enemies instead of 5 smiths 10% damage, or attack percentage from musketeer or whatever that has lesser value for Jiaoqiu. Hence, if you want full damage, you would run Pioneer plus Firesmith, or in a DOT team, you would run 4-piece Prisoner. And this is the only 4-piece set you would run. You want full damage, you get Pioneer plus Firesmith plus Glamoth. You want full damage in a DOT team, you get for Prisoner plus Glamoth. You want full support, you get Pioneer plus Messenger plus Sprightly. You need a bit more effective rate, you can replace Glamoth with Ben Cosmic. Blah blah blah, and it goes on, you get the idea. It's kinda like playing Dress to Impress on Roblox, just customize your build according to what you need. Now for the next layer of complexity, we have light cones. This will basically determine what substats you should be aiming for as well. His signature light cone is obviously the best in slot. It gives you a ton of effective rate and 24% extra vulnerability. It's very hard to compete with this light cone for Jiaoqiu. From here on, it's mix and match again, baby. If you need more effective rate, you get Eyes of the Prey. It even gives you a DOT damage buff. If you already have 140% effective rate without light cones, you can go for Patience is all you need for more damage percentage and speed. Good Night and Sleep Well for a disgusting amount of damage boost. Resolution shines as Pearls of Sweat if you like more utility from Jiaoqiu. For completely free to play options, we have Solitary Healing, which gives Break Effect that even if it's kinda useless for Jiaoqiu, it does give a DOT boost, and also helps you to regenerate energy when an enemy with his DOT is defeated. This can be useful sometimes, but Jiaoqiu needs to be consistently hit to reduce Jiaoqiu's ultimate downtime from 2 point something turns to 2 turns. Or in Pure Fiction, if the enemies just keep getting wiped out, I guess. The other completely free to play option is its Showtime, which gives you some damage boost whenever you apply debuffs, and attack percentage if your effective rate is over 80%. Unfortunately, the damage percentage is kinda low, and attack percentage has very low value for Jiaoqiu, so if you have Good Night and Sleep Well, this cone is just a worse version. Now that we have got relics and light cones out of the way, let's talk about stat goals and substats. The number one substat you should be aiming for is going to be effective rate unless you already have 140% effective rate. From then on, the priority should drop a bit unless you want to guarantee that his ultimate debuff will land. Enemies in Memory of Chaos 12 usually have 40% debuff rest, so you need about 180% effective rate to guarantee the debuff. Honestly, even if it doesn't land the first time, there is a good chance for it to land shortly after, so I wouldn't stress too much about getting 180%. Maybe a little more like 150 to 60% can be nice. Well, unless you have his signature icon, then it's pretty easy to get around 180%. The next most important substat is obviously speed. This will literally determine how fast Jiaoqiu can give Acheron stacks. For other damage carries, it's not nearly as important, but it can still mean you get extra skill points and more. Afterwards, it's attack, because the other stats are just worse. From there, the usual defensive options like effective resistance, HP, and defense. And so other than the 140% effective rate goal, I highly recommend you get at least 140 plus speed. The higher the better, of course. Attack honestly doesn't matter as much, because if you have less attack, it might be because you are using damage percentage relics or light cones instead. Now for the minority of players who want to get more copies of him, we will be reviewing his Eidolons. Firstly, his E1 increases his team's damage by 40% against enemies with Ashen Roast. So basically, your entire team will get it. And his talent also applies one more Ashen Roast, meaning you stack slightly faster. Honestly, his ultimate will be doing most of the stacking for you already, and because his bonus ability can apply maximum stacks to enemies entering during his ultimate, the second part is a bit redundant. However, the 40% damage boost can be kinda useful. For example, in DOD teams where you are replacing units like Runmei or Robin, who have a team-wide damage percentage buff, this basically helps Jiaoqiu do better in such teams. In other teams that already have a ton of damage percentage, or a team like Acheron, it's not as good because they already get a ton of damage boost. E2 however is much better and basically turns Jiaoqiu into a secondary damage dealer. His DOT increases by 300%, so from 180% attack to 480%. This is much higher than Kafka's 290%. I mean, the increase is already higher than Kafka's multiplier. So you can kinda imagine that this does quite a lot of damage. In a DOT team, I've estimated it to do around 24,000 damage, or almost a 230% increase from what it was before. Higher if you have Kafka E1 and stuff like that. This is obviously extremely strong in DOT teams, and it means he's much more of a secondary DPS in other teams, and can actually contribute a decent amount to the damage total. E4, when the zone exists created by his ultimate, enemy's attack is reduced by 15%. This is really bad in most cases, just like most E4s, but if you are running Zero Cycle without sustain, or very tough stages like Golden Gears, Divergent Universe, it can help a tiny bit. Finally, E6. He increases the total Ashen Rose stacks to 9, so from 35% vulnerability to 55%, which is kinda crazy. This also gives E1 more value, because there are literally more stacks to be stacked. Each stack also now reduces all type resistance by 3%, so a total of 27%, which is also huge. And finally, when enemies are defeated, their stacks can be transferred to the enemy with the lowest number of stacks, making it very easy to keep a high amount of stacks on enemies. E6 is obviously E6ing, who is surprised at this point. And so in terms of priority, E6 is the best, followed by E2, E1 and E4. But obviously you can only get them in order, so I can never really understand why people put Eidolon priorities in the guides, but here you go anyway. I think in my previous video I didn't quite get this message across as clearly as I wanted to, but Jiaoqiu can be used in literally any team. You can put him with Acheron, with Yunli, Buttil, your dog, your family, your cat, I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. His main issue is that he's not much of an upgrade over the other supports, or there are literally better supports in such teams. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's bad in those teams. He's actually very versatile, because most of his vulnerability is universal and will affect all kinds of damage in the game. Obviously 15% of his vulnerability only affects ultimate damage, so if you want to make full use of him or be optimal or whatever, ultimate dependent teams are the best, which is why he's better than Pella in Acheron and Argenti teams. I think Jiaoqiu teams can be a little bit complicated, so I thought it would be best to represent my ideas, illustrate my thoughts on the different kind of teams that Jiaoqiu can be used in. Obviously, you shouldn't be taking this as 100% fact. It is more of like a guideline to help you understand which teams you can be using Jiaoqiu in. The easiest way to be able to tell what kind of teams Jiaoqiu can be used in is to understand Jiaoqiu's role in the first place. This goes for any character in the game really. So for Jiaoqiu, he really excels in applying debuffs. He is pretty good for ultimate dependent damage dealers. He is pretty good in pure fiction, much better than Pella, because he is able to apply the debuffs as long as his ultimate is up. And so, that would affect the teams that he can be used in. Firstly, we have Acheron. Acheron is both ultimate dependent and really wants debuffs to be applied. And that is why Jiaoqiu is so strong for Acheron. Acheron is also very AoE dependent. She is very strong against 5 targets and wants to be played against 5 targets as much as possible. Obviously, it's not always going to happen, but if you could, you would want to deal with 5 enemies, and Jiaoqiu is great in those scenarios. Argenti is kind of the same, except that he doesn't really need debuffs. He just really likes ultimate damage. The reason why he is slightly lower is because you have to compete with, say, like Sparkle, because his first slot is already going to be Ho and Tingyun, because they regenerate energy for him, and so you would have to compete with Sparkle, and Sparkle is pretty damn strong. Next we have side grade, basically meaning that Jiaoqiu will be on the same level as the other substitutes. And you would notice a common theme around them. Basically they are very AoE dependent. They use a lot of follow-up attacks for their damage, and they do a decent amount of ultimate damage, especially Yunli and Jade. And that is why Jiaoqiu is pretty good for them, because Jiaoqiu is very good in AoE scenarios. Jiaoqiu gives you pretty decent damage, even if you have 2 damage dealers. Jiaoqiu gives you pretty good ultimate damage. Next we have in between, basically for units that I can't quite decide whether they definitely have better supports. Like they will have arguments in favor of like a side grade, or they will have arguments in favor of definitely better supports. So for Blade doesn't really have a best in slot support yet. He is mostly HP scaling, much higher than his attack percentage scaling. So right now his best support I believe is Bronya, but Bronya gives you some attack percentage, and Blade can't really use that efficiently. which is why when you have a debuffer like Pella or Jiaoqiu, they will usually increase Blade's damage, or they will be more efficient than an attack percentage boosting unit like Tingyun and stuff like that. For Qingyuan, he is kind of in the mix as well because he is kind of like these units here, except that he's a lot slower and he isn't really dependent on his ultimate. So he does a lot of AoE, his ultimate is AoE, but his Lightning Lord wants to hit only 2 to 3 targets. And it's also because of his team. You usually use like Huo, Tingyun, or maybe even Robin, Sparkle, and it's very hard for Jiaoqiu to compete, which is why he's kind of in between. But in pure fiction teams, it might be possible to maybe use Tingyuan and another damage dealer. Maybe you can use Robin then, maybe you can use Jiaoqiu then as well, which is why I put him in between. Honestly, he is probably closer to here, but whatever. Next we have Sele. She's kind of weird as well, like Jingyuan. They both have an identity crisis. He's a hunt unit that wants to deal with many enemies, which is why I'm not very sure, because technically Silver Wolf would be the best in slot in like Mono Quantum, right? But the thing is, Sele wants to deal with many enemies, and Silver Wolf is a very single target focused debuffer, which means she will not be able to keep up with debuffing the units that Sele wants to attack. And in that case, it might be better to run, say, Jiaoqiu or Pella. However, if it's purely single target, then obviously Silver Wolf will be better, right? Now onto Black Sword and Kafka. I think if people are unhappy with this guideline or tier list, it would probably be Black Sword and Kafka being only in between. It's just that Jiaoqiu isn't very good for duty teams, even though he has a duty himself. We currently use Robin or Runmei in duty teams, and they aren't even made for duty. Their best in slot team is break and follow-up attacks respectively, right? Or fast attacks. Not even really geared towards duty, but they give so many buffs to duty that Jiaoqiu can't really compete with them at E0. And so I think it's a bit more fair to put it here, because I'm pretty sure Robin and Runmei still give you more damage than with Jiaoqiu. However, if you do have E2 Jiaoqiu, it is definitely going to be at least a side grade. I think more realistically somewhere here, but at least here. But obviously most people will not have E2 Jiaoqiu, so yeah, maybe I'll just put them here instead. Next we have their definitely better supports, so basically if you own their best in slot supports, you have no reason to be using Jiaoqiu in that team. Firstly we have Firefly. Firefly's team is just very rigid or very stiff. It's very hard to replace anyone because we don't even really have a lot of break supports right now. And the only 2 break supports that we are using, or 3 if you count Gallagher, they all do very well with Firefly. For example, Runaway gives you weakness break efficiency, Harmony MC gives you a ton of super break damage, and even if you run Sustainers, it's not the best either because Gallagher does quite a lot of damage himself, and he also increases your break damage dealt. Next we have Budihu and Jingliu. They are both here for kind of the same reason. It is because their signature light cone and the relics that they use have defense reduction or defense ignore, and when that happens, it means that defense reduction supports will be better than vulnerability supports because you are able to stack a lot of defense reduction. In case you didn't know, defense reduction gets better the more you stack of it, and so because these 2 units have sources of defense reduction, it would be better to just run Pella or maybe even Silver Wolf for like Boothill. Next we have Qingque and Danheng IL. The reason why they are both here is because they both really need a lot of skill points, which means Sparkle is going to be the best support by far. Next we have Clara, Yenqing and Ratio. They are here for quite similar reasons. Clara is basically like a single target Yunli, and the worst part is that her ultimate counter does not count as ultimate damage. Meanwhile, Yunli's ultimate counter does count as ultimate damage, which means Yunli can benefit from the 15% ultimate vulnerability, while Clara will only have 35%. And not only that, you would probably use Robin in Clara teams, you can use Tingyun, you can use Ho, whatever, you can use even Preservation March 7, so it's very hard to replace anybody on that team. Next we have Yenqing and Dr. Ratio. They are both single target hunt units. Yenqing really needs a shielder, so that's 1 slot gone. From then on, since he's so single target focused, you could probably use Silver Wolf instead, maybe even Robin. Dr. Ratio is kind of for the same reason. He's very single target focused, but most of his damage will come from follow-up attacks, and that immediately means 15% of Jiaoqiu's ultimate vulnerability is kinda useless for him. Other supports that you would normally use with Dr. Ratio is Silver Wolf, Topaz, Robin, units like that. It's just really hard for Jiaoqiu to compete with any of them because Silver Wolf's defense reduction is much higher than Pela's. Topaz has a 50% follow-up attack vulnerability, and Robin, he's Robin. So where do you even slot Jiaoqiu in this team? Finally, we have Xue Yi is kind of interesting because she likes to break, or rather reduce toughness, the skills of break effect, but she also does follow-up attack damage and skills of crit. You know what that means? It means that she can use the two, in my opinion, the two best supports in the game, Ranmei and Robin. Yeah, Jiaoqiu just cannot compete with that. But obviously, this is taking into consideration that you have Jiaoqiu's competitors. If you do not have his competitor, then obviously Jiaoqiu, you can just use him for everyone. For example, if you don't have Ranmei or Robin, suddenly Jiaoqiu becomes a pretty good choice in quite a lot of these teams. What I'm trying to say is that obviously every player will have different characters and different supports. I don't know which supports you have, so you should be building your team or using Jiaoqiu in teams based on the supports that you have. For trace priority, it's very simple and straightforward. You generally want to level up parts of the kit that are the most important. For Jiaoqiu, his debuffs are on his talent and his ultimate, so you should be focusing on those first. Honestly, you might not even need to level his basic or skill, but if you like to maximize your damage, you should eventually level it up. For minor traces, all these stats are very useful for Jiaoqiu, so I would recommend you to level everything. Now, just in case you don't quite know how to play Jiaoqiu yet, don't worry, it's super simple. Like I said earlier, Jiaoqiu is capable of a 1-turn ultimate at the start of the battle, so you usually start your battles with skill plus ultimate. From then on, you can use either your basic or your skill depending on the situation. If you want to apply Ash and Roast, you obviously use your skill. If you need to save skill points, then a basic attack is enough. Once you get your ultimate back, you can just use it pretty much instantly again, regardless of whether your ultimate is still up, and then just repeat. This is pretty much it for this Jiaoqiu guide. Hopefully I can do a Fei Xiao video in about a week. So thanks for watching. See you.
私も最近疲れてるから思い切り汗を流して毒素を排出したいかも。